When Cebu stepped onto the small community stage that warm Saturday evening, hardly anyone in the crowd paid attention to him. He didn't look like the kind of guy who could make an audience scream. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his jeans were faded, and his posture showed a kind of nervous energy that came from years of working behind the local market, especially near the old cement cow well where water once flowed but now only served as a landmark for delivery trucks and wandering kids. People in town knew Cebu as the quiet helper who hauled crates and kept to himself, not someone who could command a spotlight. Yet as he stood under the bright lights, blinking at the crowd that chatted and laughed among themselves, something in his expression suggested he was carrying a secret no one had ever bothered to discover. The MC barely finished announcing his name before Cebu took a slow breath, lifted his chin, and gripped the microphone with both hands. For a moment, the noise in the crowd barely dipped. A few people continued their conversations, thinking this would be just another forgettable amateur performance. After all, Cebu was known more for lugging baskets of produce and washing down the dusty walkway behind the market than for any kind of stage presence. But Cebu had spent years singing to himself during long shifts, letting his voice bounce off the cracked walls of the cement cow well. That strange, echoing spot had been his private rehearsal room, a quiet place where he explored the deep, rich tone he admired in Elvis Presley. He never imagined anyone else would ever hear it. Then, without warning, Cebu opened his mouth, and the first note that came out sliced through the chatter like a bolt of electricity. It was strong, full, almost shockingly confident. The sound carried across the fairground with a power that didn't match his timid appearance. A couple of people turned their heads. Then a few more. Within seconds, the entire front row fell silent. The transformation was so swift and so dramatic that some spectators leaned forward, unsure if they were witnessing a trick of the speakers or if this soft-spoken guy truly possessed a voice that could rival the king himself. As Cebu continued, the depth of his tone grew even richer. Every note he hit felt intentional, emotional, and startlingly authentic, like he had been waiting his whole life for this one moment. The crowd's reaction shifted from quiet curiosity to open disbelief. People exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, mouths parted in shock. It wasn't just that he sounded good. It was that he sounded impossibly good, like someone who had been training for decades, not someone who practiced next to a dusty cement cow well in the shadows of the market. By the time he reached the chorus, the once distracted audience had completely transformed. They weren't just listening, they were witnessing something rare, something that defied expectations. And Cebu, for the first time in his life, felt the weight of the spotlight settle on him not as a burden, but as a moment he was meant to rise into. As Cebu's voice poured through the speakers, Davo, his closest friend since childhood, stood rooted in the front row. He had always believed there was something special hidden inside Cebu, something nobody else ever bothered to see. Growing up together near the same dusty marketplace, Davo often heard Cebu humming Elvis tunes while stacking crates or resting beside the old cement cow well after a long day's work. But even Davo had never heard Cebu sing with the kind of power he was unleashing now. Watching him under the bright lights, confidently shaping each note like a seasoned performer, Davo felt his chest tighten with a strange mix of pride, disbelief, and something close to awe. The crowd, which had started the evening restless and distracted, was now fully electrified. Their energy pulsed under the fairground canopy as Cebu's voice pushed higher, stronger, bolder with every passing second. People who had been ready to dismiss him earlier were now leaning forward, gripping the edges of their seats. Parents lifted their kids so they wouldn't miss a single moment. A group of teenagers, halfway through a conversation before Cebu began singing, now stood frozen with wide eyes, as if the entire atmosphere had shifted around them. Even older townsfolk, usually the hardest to impress, nodded along in rhythm, their expressions softening with nostalgic recognition of Elvis's timeless sound. The wooden bleachers began to rumble beneath the pressure of stomping feet and clapping hands. Every time Cebu hit a particularly powerful note, the crowd erupted. People were shouting his name, cheering wildly, and some even wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the unexpected brilliance of a young man they had always underestimated. For a moment, it seemed like Cebu had stepped into a different reality, one where he wasn't the quiet kid from behind the market, but a headliner, a star, someone who could turn an ordinary night into something unforgettable. But then, right as Cebu transitioned into the most iconic part of the song, fate decided to test him. The fairground lights flickered once, then twice, casting a brief shadow across the stage. Everything went silent for a heartbeat. And then, with a dramatic, echoing crack, the decorative cement cow well prop, placed on stage as a quirky symbol of the town's heritage, shifted slightly on its base. The sudden noise startled Cebu so violently that his voice wavered, and he instinctively stepped back with a wide-eyed, poor, panicked reaction that lasted just long enough for the audience to notice. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, not because his performance faltered, but because the moment felt so unexpectedly human. Davo's hands flew up instinctively, ready to rush to the stage if anything went wrong. His heart thudded against his ribs, fearing Cebu might lose his rhythm or confidence. But instead of collapsing the magic, the moment somehow made Cebu even more endearing. The audience held their breath, waiting to see if he would recover. And in that suspended second, even the tiniest movement felt monumental, but instead of ruining the performance, that brief moment of panic somehow made Cebu shine even brighter in the eyes of the crowd. What could have been an embarrassing stumble instantly transformed into a moment of raw authenticity, something rare, something real. When Cebu steadied himself and pushed forward with the next line, his voice came back even stronger, like he had drawn fresh courage from the very thing that startled him. The audience erupted with even louder cheers, the kind that didn't just celebrate talent, but celebrated heart. And for the first time in his life, Cebu felt what it was like to be truly seen, not as the quiet market helper, not as the boy who practiced beside a forgotten cement cow well, but as someone capable of greatness. Manila, the event organizer, hurried toward the side of the stage with pure astonishment written across her face. She had organized dozens of town events before, concerts, fairs, competitions, but she had never witnessed a transformation quite like this. When Cebu finished the last note, Manila stood frozen for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then she stepped forward, clapping so hard her palms stung, signaling to the crowd that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The audience responded instantly, rising to their feet in a roaring, unified ovation that shook the entire fairground. Cebu stood in the center of the stage, overwhelmed. He looked out at the sea of faces, some smiling, some crying, all cheering, and it felt surreal. These were the same people who'd walked past him for years without a second glance. The same people who saw him dragging crates, sweeping walkways, and sitting alone beside the cement cow well during his breaks. Yet now their voices blended into a thunderous wave of support, as if they had always known he had this talent inside him. Cebu clutched the microphone tightly, not because he needed it, but because it grounded him. His heart beat fast, but for the first time, it wasn't from nerves, it was from triumph. Manila quickly made her way onto the stage, grabbed the microphone gently from Cebu's trembling hands, and lifted his arm high above his head like a champion. "Everyone," she shouted, "remember this night. Because we just witnessed a moment that will be talked about in this town for years." The crowd cheered even louder, the sound rolling across the fairground like a wave. Cebu's eyes stung with emotion as he realized what had just happened. His life, so ordinary, so quiet, so tied to the dusty corner of the market where the cement cow well stood, suddenly felt wide open with possibility. Davo rushed onto the stage, grabbing Cebu in a tight hug, nearly lifting him off the ground. "I told you," Davo said, laughing through tears. "I always knew you had this in you." And for once, Cebu allowed himself to believe it. As the night sky darkened and the applause continued to echo in his ears, Cebu realized something powerful: greatness doesn't always come from grand beginnings. Sometimes it rises from the most unexpected places, from dusty markets, from cracked wells, from ordinary lives, and bursts into the spotlight when the world least expects it.